Hello there, welcome to Nighttime Stories. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Was it amazing or just okay? Drop a rating from 1 to 10 in the comments. Now it's time to unwind. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Before you get cozy, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. It helps bring more bedtime stories your way. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin. It's been 5 years since my best friend Ethan disappeared. I remember everything about that day. The weather was perfect, the kind of autumn day where the air is cool but not cold, the trees just starting to shift into shades of orange and gold. We were 18, sitting in the parking lot of the gas station by our old high school, drinking cheap sodas and talking about nothing. Then he left. That was it. No dramatic exit, no weird behavior, no sign that anything was wrong. He got into his car, said, "I'll see you later, man," and drove off. And that was the last time anyone ever saw him. For weeks I waited for him to call, thinking maybe he just needed space. That didn't last long. The police got involved after his mom reported him missing, and soon after, the search started. His car was found abandoned an hour outside of town, parked neatly in a dirt lot next to a trailhead. His wallet was inside, so was his phone. But no Ethan. No footprints leading away from the car, no signs of a struggle. Just an empty vehicle, doors locked, keys in the cup holder. The investigation lasted months, but no real leads ever surfaced. No credit card transactions, no security footage, no body. At some point, people just moved on. Except me. Because you don't just forget someone like Ethan. I won't lie, over the years, I tried to force myself to stop thinking about him. I had to. Living with that constant uncertainty was eating away at me, and no one wants to be the guy still talking about his missing friend when everyone else has moved on. But last week, I saw something that changed everything. I was on my lunch break, scrolling through random Reddit threads, when I landed on a post about weird photo coincidences. Someone had posted a tourist photo from Rome, just a normal street scene, cafes, people walking, a couple posing in front of a fountain. And then I saw him, Ethan, standing in the background. Not walking, not interacting, just standing. His face was partially turned away, but I knew it was him. The same haircut, the same build, the same slouched posture. For a few seconds, my brain tried to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him. Maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see. Then I zoomed in. The shirt. A faded black band tee, his favorite one. The same one he was wearing the day he disappeared. I sat there for a long time, just staring at my screen. The comments were filled with people making jokes, pointing out weird stuff in other pictures, but I couldn't focus on any of it. I clicked on the OP's profile, found their other posts, tried to figure out when this photo was taken. 2 months ago. Ethan disappeared 5 years ago. And yet there he was, looking exactly the same. I told myself it was just a freak coincidence. That's what I wanted to believe. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. I started going through old vacation photos, random news footage, background images on social media. And I kept finding him. In a Paris street photo from 2021. At the edge of a music festival in 2019. In the crowd of a New York City parade last year. Always the same posture. Always watching. But never looking at the camera. Never interacting with anyone. Like he was just passing through. Like he wasn't really there. I thought about telling someone, but what the hell would I even say? Hey, I think my missing best friend is showing up in the background of random photos, and he hasn't aged at all. That's not normal. It's not possible. and yet I couldn't let it go. I spent the entire weekend combing through Google, Facebook, anything that had candid background images. Then, 2 nights ago, I found something that made my skin crawl. A local news segment from last week. Nothing big, just a short piece about a community event in a nearby city. I almost didn't click on it, but as the camera panned across the crowd, there he was. Not in the background this time. Closer. Standing just behind the reporter, slightly out of focus. And this time, he was looking directly at the camera. For the first time since he disappeared. Like he wanted me to see him. I haven't slept since. Every time I close my eyes, I see that frame from the news broadcast. His face. Expressionless. Unmoving. Like he knew I was watching. Like he was waiting. I don't know what to do. But I have this awful feeling that I'll see him again soon. Maybe even closer. I spent the entire night watching that news clip over and over. Ethan stood there, right behind the reporter, just slightly out of focus. But unlike the other pictures where he was always facing away, always blurred by motion this time, he was looking straight at the camera. Right at me. Like he knew I would find him. By morning, I had convinced myself that I was losing it. That maybe this was some kind of grief-fueled delusion, that maybe my brain, desperate for closure, was finding Ethan in places where he didn't actually exist. It made sense, right? Except, the photos were real. The news footage was real. And Ethan had been wearing the exact same clothes he disappeared in. If this was a coincidence, it was a damn perfect one. I needed proof. I needed to find out if anyone else had noticed him. I went back to the Reddit post where I had first seen him, the tourist photo from Romiand, scrolled through the comments. Most of them were jokes or people pointing out weird background details. But one comment stood out. It was buried near the bottom, posted just a few hours before. A user with a throwaway account had replied to the thread. "I've seen him too." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. Just 4 words. I clicked on the username, hoping for more info. But when I did, a message popped up. "This account has been deleted." I sat back, my heart pounding. Someone else had seen him, and now they were gone. I spent the rest of the day digging. I scoured forums, reverse-searched images, even went through obscure missing person databases to see if there were any similar cases. Nothing. Ethan was the only one. Then, just when I was about to give up, I found something. An old message board post from 2018. The title stopped me cold. "Do you recognize this man? He keeps showing up in my pictures." I clicked on it. The post was from a woman who had been backpacking across Europe. She claimed she had noticed a strange pattern in her vacation photos, the same man, appearing in the background, over and over. Never facing the camera. Never interacting. Just standing there. She had even uploaded a few photos. And in the last one, from London in 2017, I saw him. Ethan. Wearing the same black t-shirt, looking exactly the same, as if he hadn't aged a single day. I scrolled down, searching for more information, but the user had never replied to any of the comments. Most people thought it was a prank or an urban legend, but one reply caught my eye. "If you keep seeing him, stop looking." That night, I started seeing things. At first, it was just my mind playing tricks on me. A shadow in the corner of my room that wasn't there before. A figure standing too far away to make out, disappearing when I turned my head. But then, it got worse. I woke up to a notification on my phone. An airdrop request. A photo. No name, no sender. Just an image of my own apartment. Taken from the street below. Taken minutes ago. I rushed to the window, heart hammering, but the street was empty. No sign of whoever took the picture. No sign of him. But I knew Ethan was watching. The next morning, I tried to call his mom. We hadn't talked much since the first year after he disappeared. She had moved out of town, tried to start fresh. I wasn't even sure if she'd answer. But she did. "Hello?" Her voice was tired, wary. I swallowed hard. "It's me. I think I found something about Ethan." Silence. Then, in a quiet, brittle voice, "You shouldn't be looking." A chill ran through me. "What?" A pause, then softer this time. "He's gone, honey. You need to let him go." "No, listen." I pressed. "I've seen him. In photos. Videos. Just last week he was on the news." She let out a sharp breath. "Stop." I blinked. "I mean it," she said. "Don't talk about him. Don't look for him." She sounded panicked. Like she was afraid. "Mrs. Carter, what's going on?" "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she hung up. I sat there, my phone still pressed to my ear, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I had expected her to be shocked, confused, hopeful, not terrified. Why was she scared? And why did she tell me to stop looking? That night I locked all my doors. I wasn't taking any chances. I tried to distract myself, tried to pretend everything was fine. But then, right before midnight, I got a text. No number, no name. Just a single message. "He's closer now." My skin went ice cold. I stared at the screen, hands shaking. Then, another notification. An image. I hesitated before clicking on it. And when I did, I nearly dropped my phone. It was a picture of me, sitting on my couch, taken from outside my window. A blurry figure stood in the background, watching me, waiting. Ethan. I ran to the window, throwing the blinds open. Nothing. I grabbed my keys, ran to the front door, yanked it open. The street was empty. But on my doorstep, placed neatly at the center of the doormat, was a photograph. An old one. From our last summer together. Ethan and I sitting on the hood of his car, smiling at the camera. But someone had scratched my face out. And underneath, scrawled in shaky black ink, were 3 words. "You found me." I stared at the photograph on my doorstep, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Ethan and I sitting on the hood of his car. My face was scratched out. And beneath it, written in jagged, uneven handwriting, "You found me." I didn't touch it. Didn't pick it up, didn't move. Just stood there, frozen in the open doorway, staring down at the picture like it might change if I looked long enough. The neighborhood was quiet. The street lights flickered. Nothing moved. But I could feel it. That awful pressing sensation, the weight of being watched. I swallowed hard and forced myself to step back inside, locking the door behind me. The photo stayed on the porch. I didn't want it in my house. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts ran in circles. Why now? Why was this happening now, 5 years later? And the real question, what the hell happened to Ethan? By morning, I was done ignoring it. I needed answers. I needed to go back to the last place he was seen. His car had been found an hour outside of town, near an old hiking trail. I had been there before once when the search teams were looking for him. Back then, it had just been a location, a place he disappeared. Now, it felt like the only real clue I had left. The drive felt longer than I remembered. The roads were empty, stretching endlessly between rows of trees. The deeper I went, the more I felt that awful weight in my chest, like I was moving toward something I wasn't meant to find. By the time I reached the dirt lot, my hands were white-knuckled around the steering wheel. I turned off the car and sat there for a moment, staring out at the trailhead. Nothing had changed. Same wooden signpost, half rotted with age. Same overgrown path leading into the trees. I stepped out of the car. The air was too still, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I followed the trail. Ethan's car had been found about 100 yards in, just off the main path. I moved carefully, my pulse thrumming in my ears, scanning the trees for any sign of him, any sign of movement. Nothing. Just trees. Just silence. Then, I saw the clearing. The same one from 5 years ago. And in the center, standing exactly where Ethan's car had once been, was a single black t-shirt. Laid out perfectly. Like someone had placed it there for me to find. I stopped cold. The t-shirt was his. The same faded band tee he had been wearing the day he disappeared. It was clean. Too clean. Like it hadn't been sitting in the dirt for 5 years. Like it had been put there recently. Like someone had been waiting for me to come back. I took a step forward, then stopped. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier. And then I noticed it. The trees around me, they weren't right. I looked closer. The bark had scratches long, jagged marks, like claw marks. Number. Not claws. Fingernails. I stepped closer to one of the trees. The scratches weren't random. They were letters. Carved deep into the wood. Help me. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I turned and froze, because someone was standing at the edge of the clearing. Not moving. Not making a sound. Just watching me. Ethan. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. He looked exactly the same. Same face, same build, same clothes. But his eyes. Something was wrong with his eyes. They were too dark. Too empty. Like a photograph that had been overexposed, the color washed away. He just stood there. Not blinking. Not moving. Waiting. I forced myself to speak. Ethan? No reaction. I took a slow step forward. Where have you been? He tilted his head just slightly. Like he was listening. Like he was processing my words. Then finally moved. A slow, deliberate step toward me. Then another. And another. Something in my brain screamed at me to run. But I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen in place, as he kept moving closer. Until he was an arm's length away. And then, for the first time, he spoke. His voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used in years. You found me. I was shaking. What happened to you? I whispered. Ethan didn't answer. Didn't blink. His head tilted again. I waited. A sharp wind blew through the clearing. The trees groaned, whispering against each other. Ethan's shirt, the one on the ground, rippled slightly. And then, his mouth curved into a smile. A hollow, unnatural smile. Like he was forcing his face to imitate an expression he no longer understood. I backed up. I couldn't help it. My body reacted before my mind could. And the second I moved, Ethan took a sharp step forward. Faster this time. Too fast. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a root. I hit the ground hard, breath knocking out of my lungs. By the time I looked up, he was gone. The clearing was empty, the air silent. The only sign he had ever been there was his shirt, still lying on the ground. I scrambled to my feet, chest heaving. What the hell just happened? Was I imagining it? Had I really just seen him? Number. No, he was real. I had heard him. I had seen his face. And that smile. I will never forget that smile. I ran back to my car. I didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't breathe until I was locked inside with the engine running. I stared at the trees, waiting for something to move. But there was nothing. The woods were still, like he had never been there at all. When I got home, there was a message on my phone. No number, no name, just 3 words. Don't leave yet. I didn't move for a long time. The message was still glowing on my phone screen, those 3 words burning into my brain. Don't leave yet. No sender, no number, just a blank, empty notification. I sat there in my locked car, parked in my own driveway, staring out at the quiet street. Everything looked normal. But I knew it wasn't. I had just seen Ethan, and I knew deep in my bones I wasn't supposed to. I should have gone inside, locked my doors, burned my phone, done anything but what I actually did. I replied, "Who is this?" I didn't expect a response, but one came immediately. "Come back." I turned my phone off, took a long, shuddering breath, and tried to think. Ethan was missing for 5 years. Now he was back, but he wasn't the same. He hadn't aged, hadn't changed, like time had just paused for him. And the way he moved, the way he spoke, it wasn't right. I thought about his smile, that hollow, forced smile, and something cold settled in my chest. I don't think Ethan is alive. I didn't sleep. I sat in my dark apartment, watching the windows, listening to every sound outside. I kept telling myself I was safe, that I had locked the doors, that I was inside, that he couldn't get in. But at exactly 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A picture. It was my front door, taken from outside. I couldn't breathe. Slowly, without making a sound, I crept toward the peephole. My hand trembled as I pressed my eye to the door. At first I saw nothing, just the dark, empty hallway of my apartment complex. Then, a shadow moved. A shape, shifting in the dim glow of the exit sign. I stepped back, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Another buzz. Another picture. This time, it was taken from inside my apartment. I ran. Didn't think, didn't grab anything, just bolted. Out the front door, down the stairs, out into the night. I didn't stop running until I was in my car. Didn't stop driving until I was miles away. By the time I pulled into an empty gas station, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep them on the wheel. I forced myself to breathe. And then I made a decision. I was going to find out what happened to Ethan. By sunrise, I was back at the trailhead. It looked exactly the same as the day before. The same trees, the same empty dirt lot. But I knew better now. I wasn't alone. And whatever Ethan had become was waiting for me. I retraced my steps, back down the path, back to the clearing where I had seen him. But when I got there, my breath caught in my throat, because the t-shirt was gone, and in its place was a small handwritten note. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The paper was old, crumpled, dirty, but I could still make out the shaky, uneven handwriting. I waited, I waited, I waited. Why didn't you come? I swallowed hard. Ethan had written this. But when? The wind picked up around me, rustling the trees, and suddenly wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw it. A presence, standing just behind me. I turned. Ethan was there, closer than before. His face paler, his eyes darker. Like the more I found, the more he faded. His lips moved, but no sound came out. And then, a whisper, so quiet I barely heard it over the wind. Help me. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. Ethan? My voice shook. His body twitched, a small, unnatural movement, like a puppet on tangled strings. Then finally looked me in the eyes, and my stomach turned, because there was nothing there. No recognition, no emotion, just emptiness. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, he lunged. Everything happened too fast. 1 second, he was standing several feet away. The next, this face was inches from mine. I stumbled back, my vision blurring, my ears ringing with a high-pitched static. And then, I wasn't in the woods anymore. I was standing in a dark, windowless space. The air was heavy, wrong, and I wasn't alone. I turned. Figures lining the walls, standing completely still. Some of them I recognized. People from the news. People from old missing persons posters. And all of them were staring at me. My breath hitched. I turned back around. Ethan was still there, but his body was flickering, like an image on a dying screen. He reached for me, and for the first time since I found him, his face changed. Not blank, not hollow, but afraid, like he knew what was about to happen, like he was fighting it. Go, he whispered, and then he screamed. I hit the ground, gasping for breath. The woods. I was back in the woods. The sky was dark, the clearing was empty. Ethan was gone. But in my hand, clenched so tight, my nails cut into my palm, was the note. The only proof I had left that any of it was real. I wasn't supposed to find him. And now, I think something knows I did. I staggered back to my car, my legs barely carrying me. I didn't stop driving until I was hours away. Didn't stop until I was in a new town, a new apartment, a new life. I deleted the photos, destroyed my phone, told myself I'd never look again. And for a while, I thought it was over. But then, last night, a new photo arrived. No sender, no location, just an image of a familiar wooded clearing. And in the center, Ethan, waiting. I didn't want to open the photo. I knew what it would be before I even looked. The woods. The same clearing where Ethan had disappeared. And there he was, standing in the middle of it, still waiting. Like he always had been. Like he always would be. I stared at the image, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. Fear, dread, guilt. Whatever had happened to Ethan, he wasn't supposed to come back. and I wasn't supposed to find him. But I had. And now something wanted me to finish what I started. I should have ignored it, deleted the picture, blocked whatever unknown force had sent it. But I didn't, because I knew deep down I couldn't leave him like this. I had spent 5 years wondering where he went. Now I had my answer, and it wasn't fair. Ethan had been trapped in that place, wherever the hell it was, for half a decade, stuck between here and nowhere. I couldn't just walk away, so I made my choice. I was going back. I drove through the night, headlights cutting through the endless stretch of empty road. The closer I got, the heavier the air became, like something was pulling me in, like it had been waiting for me, just like Ethan had. By the time I reached the dirt lot, my hands were shaking on the wheel. I turned off the car and stepped out. The wind was too still. The trees felt too tall. And in the distance, down the trailhead, I could see it, a dim light glowing in the clearing, waiting for me. I walked forward, every step feeling heavier than the last. The deeper I went, the more the world felt wrong, like I was stepping out of time, like I was moving towards something I wasn't supposed to see. Then, I entered the clearing, and he was there. Ethan, standing exactly where he had been in the photo, expressionless, motionless, watching me, waiting. I stopped a few feet away. My pulse was a roaring pulse of static in my ears. For a moment, we just stared at each other. And then, I took a slow step forward. Ethan, my voice barely came out. He didn't move, didn't blink, but his lips parted, and this time his voice wasn't hollow. It wasn't empty. It was pleading. Please, help me. A shiver crawled down my spine. I swallowed hard, too don't know how. He took a step toward me, and I finally saw it. His eyes, up close, I could tell they weren't just dark. They were wrong, like a reflection in deep water, just barely out of focus. Like he was being held here by something else, something that wasn't letting him go. The wind shifted, the air thickened, and I felt it, the presence, the thing that had taken him, the thing that had been keeping him here. It was watching. It was waiting for me to take his place. I could feel it in my bones, in the marrow of my spine. If I stayed too long, if I looked too hard, I wouldn't be able to leave. I clenched my fists. I had come here for a reason. I wasn't leaving without him. I reached out, grabbing his wrist. His skin was cold. Too cold. Like touching something that had been left out in the winter for too long. I pulled. He didn't move. His body jerked slightly, like something was holding him in place. Like he was tied to the air itself. I gritted my teeth. Come on, man. My voice shook. You have to move. He shuddered. His hands twitched. And then, finally took a staggered step forward. The wind screamed through the clearing, and I felt it break. Whatever was holding him, whatever had kept him here. I yanked him forward, and then we ran. Branches whipped past us, the world blurred at the edges. I didn't know if we were moving through the woods or if the woods were moving around us. Everything felt stretched, twisted, like reality was snapping back into place. Ethan's grip was tight on my wrist. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just kept running. until suddenly, we burst into the parking lot. The cold night air slammed into me, sharp and real and solid. We were back, and when I turned, Ethan was still there, breathing, shaking, alive. Neither of us spoke. I was too afraid to ask if this was real. Too afraid that if I did, he would disappear again. But he didn't. He just stood there, his chest rising and falling with ragged, uneven breaths. And then, after a long, terrible pause, he looked at me. His eyes were clear now, human again, and his lips parted. Thank you. I don't know what happened to him. I don't think I ever will. Ethan doesn't talk about it. He doesn't remember much, just a feeling of waiting, a sense of time stretching endlessly, like he was in a place where time didn't move, a place that wasn't meant for him. He told me one thing, though, one thing that still makes my skin crawl. It wasn't just me. I don't know what that means. I don't know if I want to. We left town after that. Ethan moved in with his sister. I packed up and got as far away from those woods as I could. And for the most part, it's been quiet. Nothing strange. No more photos. No more messages. But sometimes, I think about that clearing, that impossible place. And I wonder how many more are still waiting. How many more were taken? And worst of all, who will go looking for them next? I don't know if I'm overreacting. That's what I keep telling myself anyway. But every time I try to let it go, every time I tell myself it was nothing, I feel that tight pull in my chest, that gnawing, sick feeling that won't go away. Something is wrong in our house. And I think it has to do with our baby. My wife, Sarah, and I had our daughter, Lily, 6 months ago. She's perfect, healthy, happy, all things considered, a pretty easy baby. We live in a small one-story home in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just a cozy little place we'd been fixing up since we bought it. Neither of us were paranoid people. We never felt unsafe before. But having a baby changes things. That's why we got the monitor. A simple night vision baby cam with motion detection and sound alerts. Something to give us peace of mind. That's what it was supposed to do. But now, I think it's the reason I'm not sleeping. It started last week. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a soft chime from my phone. Motion detected. Lily's room. I wasn't alarmed at first. Babies move in their sleep all the time. The alert was probably just her shifting, maybe rolling over. But when I opened the app, Lily was perfectly still, lying on her back, sleeping peacefully in her crib. For a moment I felt a rush of relief. Then I saw it, just at the edge of the frame, the corner of a face. Not Lily's. Someone else. The monitor didn't have the best resolution, but it was enough to see the faint outline of a forehead, a sliver of a cheekbone, peeking into the frame. Watching. I froze. My mind short-circuited, flipping between explanations. A reflection? A glitch? I forced myself to blink, to focus. The figure wasn't moving. Just watching. I nearly dropped my phone. And then, just as I started to move, the screen went black. I shoved off the blankets and ran. Didn't stop to wake Sarah, didn't think. I threw open Lily's door so hard it smacked the wall. The crib was right where it had always been. Lily was still there, sleeping, completely undisturbed. And there was no one else in the room. I stood there for a long time, my breath heavy, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs. I checked everything. Closet? Empty. Under the crib? Nothing. Windows? Locked from the inside. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. And yet, I knew what I saw. Someone had been in the frame, watching, and they weren't there now. I didn't sleep after that. I spent the rest of the night going through the footage, trying to find the exact frame I had seen before the camera cut out. But when I played it back, the motion alert was still there. The clip was still there. But the face was gone, like it had never been there at all. Sarah woke up around 6 a.m., groggy and stretching as she walked into the living room. I was still on the couch, my laptop open, the baby monitor pulled up on my phone. She frowned. "Did you even come back to bed?" I didn't answer at first. Just stared at the monitor, watching Lily's tiny chest rise and fall. "I saw something," I said finally. Sarah's forehead creased. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. I knew how it sounded, but I told her everything. The alert, the face, the way it disappeared from the footage. She listened, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. "Babe," she said softly, "you haven't slept. You're exhausted. Maybe you just imagined it." I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to believe that. But I couldn't. Because I knew what I saw. I tried to move on. Tried to pretend like it was just a weird camera glitch, like Sarah said. For a few days, nothing happened. And then last night, it happened again. I woke up to the motion alert at exactly 2:11 a.m. This time my hands were shaking when I opened the app. Lily was asleep. And just like before, something was standing at the edge of the frame. But this time, it was closer. More of the face was visible. A sliver of a jawline, a shadowed eye socket. And the worst part? It was lower this time. Like it was leaning into the crib. Like it was whispering something. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The screen flickered. And then, Lily stirred. Her little head turned to the side. And she smiled. I ran. I don't even remember getting out of bed. By the time I reached the nursery, my hands were already on the doorknob, already twisting. But the second I stepped inside, I stopped cold. Because Lily wasn't alone. There was something in the crib with her. I barely processed what I was seeing. A hand. Resting gently on her blanket. A hand that wasn't mine. That wasn't Sarah's. That wasn't anyone's who was supposed to be here. I don't remember pulling Lily out. Don't remember grabbing her so fast she let out a startled cry. The second she was in my arms, I turned the light on. And there was nothing there. No hand. No one. Just an empty crib. Sarah ran in bleary-eyed and panicked. What happened? I couldn't speak. Just held Lily close, still feeling that phantom hand resting over her. Sarah took one look at me, then at the crib, and her expression changed. For the first time, I saw fear. I didn't sleep last night. I sat in the living room holding Lily, watching the monitor like my life depended on it. Sarah sat beside me, silent, wide awake too. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us asked the obvious question. Who was in the room with our daughter? I don't know what to do. Sarah wants to call the police, but what do we even say? That something is watching our baby? That it might not be human? That it might be someone inside the house? I don't know what's worse. The idea that something is breaking in at night, or the idea that something never left. I sat on the couch, holding Lily against my chest, her tiny body rising and falling with soft, steady breaths. Sarah sat beside me, rigid, her eyes glued to the baby monitor. Neither of us had spoken in over an hour. We were both waiting for something to move, waiting for something to come back. But the screen stayed still. The crib was empty. Sarah was the one who finally broke the silence. "We need to call someone." Her voice was hoarse. "We need to." "Tell them what?" I interrupted, my grip tightening around Lily. "That something is in the house?" Sarah rubbed her arms like she was trying to shake something off. "You saw it too, the hand, the face on the monitor. This isn't just a glitch or our imagination." I swallowed. She was right. I hated that she was right. Because if we weren't imagining this, if it wasn't a trick of the light or some camera malfunction, that meant it was real. And if it was real, that meant someone was in the house with our baby. We checked everything. We moved through the house together, Lily clutched against my chest, searching every inch of the place. The closets, the attic, the crawl space beneath the house. We checked the windows, the locks, the security system logs. There was no sign of a break-in. No signs of forced entry. Nothing was missing, nothing was out of place. But we knew. We felt it. Like an echo in the air. Like something had been here, watching. And now it was waiting for us to fall asleep. By 5 a.m., Sarah gave up pretending we could act like everything was normal. She picked up her phone and dialed the police. She told them what we knew, no dramatics, no exaggeration. Just the facts. We had a baby monitor with night vision. We got an alert. We saw a face, a hand, someone in the crib. And when we went to check, there was no one there. The cops arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking like they'd heard 100 stories like this before. They searched the house, checked the locks, the windows, the vents. They asked if we had any enemies, anyone with a grudge, an ex, a disgruntled family member. We told them no. We weren't the kind of people who had enemies. We were just parents. Parents who had seen something impossible. After about an hour, the lead officer gave us a careful look. "There's no sign of forced entry," he said. "Nothing's been tampered with." He hesitated, scratching the back of his head. "Sometimes when you're sleep deprived, the mind." I cut him off. "This isn't in our heads." Sarah held up her phone. "We have footage. Look." She pulled up the clip from last night, the one that had woken me up. We watched together. The dim glow of Lily's nightlight. Her tiny figure, asleep in the crib. The soft rustling sound. And then, the face. The officer stiffened. The woman beside him took a sharp step closer to the screen. "Play that again," she said. We did. The same image, the same slow movement at the edge of the frame. The face. Not completely visible, not in focus. But there. Watching. Not Lily. Us. The officers exchanged a look. The male officer turned to us, his expression unreadable. "We're going to do another sweep," he said. His tone was different now. Less skeptical. More cautious. Like he realized we weren't just paranoid parents. Like he knew something was off. They searched the house again, this time more carefully. Checking behind furniture, tapping on walls, testing the vents. We stayed in the kitchen, Lily cradled between us. Neither of us spoke. And then, a sound. A soft, muffled creak. The female officer turned sharply toward the nursery. "That wasn't us," she said. My throat felt tight. We followed her to Lily's room, the air thick, heavy, suffocating. I didn't want to go back in, but I had to. The officer stood near the crib, head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something we couldn't hear. Then, she looked up. There was a vent above the crib, a small one screwed into the ceiling. The officer stepped onto the rocking chair and lifted a flashlight. Sarah gripped my wrist so hard her nails dug into my skin. The officer's light hit something. Something inside the vent. Something reflective. Something that moved. Everything happened at once. The officer cursed. The male cop rushed forward. Sarah let out a sharp gasp as the officer reached up, gripping the vent. I took a step back, my legs locking up, my arms tightening around Lily. The officer yanked, and the vent cover popped off. And then, something fell. It wasn't a person. Not exactly. It was a bundle of objects. A crumpled t-shirt, a plastic bottle, and a baby pacifier. Not ours. Not Lily's. Sarah made a small, choked sound. The officer crouched, picking up the pacifier with gloved hands. It was old, dingy, like it had been used by someone else's baby. A long time ago. Jesus, the male officer muttered, exhaling sharply. His partner stood, her face pale. "This isn't the first time," she said. She turned to us, her mouth set in a grim line. "You need to leave this house, tonight." The weight of her words settled in my chest. Sarah stared at her, unblinking. "But why? Who?" The officer hesitated. Then, carefully, "I think someone's been here before." She looked down at the items again. "Maybe someone's still here." I tightened my grip on Lily. Sarah grabbed my hand. We didn't argue. We didn't ask more questions. We packed a bag, walked out the door, and didn't look back. We're at a hotel now. The police are investigating, checking records, trying to figure out who lived there before us. But Sarah and I already made our decision. We're never going back. Because whoever or whatever was in our house, they had been there long before we arrived. And worst of all, they had been waiting for Lily. The police stayed for hours after finding the items in Lily's nursery vent. They dusted for prints, took photos, and checked every entry point in the house. But the part that made my skin crawl was when one of the officers pulled me aside. "Your vents lead to an external access point." His voice was low, careful. "There are fresh handprints on the outside cover. Someone's been removing it from outside." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You mean they were never inside the house?" His jaw tightened. "Not in the way you think." That night, Sarah and I packed our things. We weren't staying another second. The police arranged for a team to inspect the vents, and we drove to a motel with Lily. I barely slept, my mind racing with questions. Who had been watching our baby? How long had they been climbing in and out of the vents? And worst of all, what did they want? The next morning, I got a call. It was one of the officers. His voice was serious. "We found something." My stomach twisted. "What?" "A sleeping bag and food wrappers in the main duct. Someone had been hiding inside your vent system." I gripped the phone tighter, bile rising in my throat. "They weren't living there full time," he continued, "but they were coming and going. They had a way in and out." I thought of Lily's smiling face on the baby monitor. I thought of the hand resting on her blanket. Someone had been whispering to her at night. I clenched my fists. "Did you catch them?" A pause. "Number." The house was now a crime scene. The police set up surveillance, hoping the intruder would return. But they never did. Whoever had been watching Lily was gone. And that terrified me even more. Because that meant they knew we were onto them. They were waiting for a better time. 2 weeks later, we officially moved out. I never stepped foot inside that house again. and I never checked the baby monitor again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that motion alert. The face on the edge of the frame, the way Lily smiled at something I couldn't see. And I wonder, how close had we been to losing her? I don't even know how to start this, but I need to get it out. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. Maybe I'm just losing my mind. I don't know anymore. This happened 2 years ago, and to this day I haven't been able to go camping again. The thought of it makes my stomach twist. So, for context, I've always loved the outdoors. Grew up hiking, camping, doing all that solo survivalist crap that made me feel like some kind of badass. I knew how to handle myself in the woods, how to navigate, how to listen to the sounds of nature and know when something wasn't right. That last part? I wish I had listened to it sooner. It was supposed to be a weekend trip, me and 3 buddies, just a chill guys getaway deep in the mountains. We picked a spot about 10 miles from the nearest trailhead, somewhere totally off-grid. No cell service, no people, just us and nature. The first night was perfect. We drank, we laughed, we told dumb horror stories around the fire, the usual. Around 2 a.m. we all finally crashed in our tents. Nothing weird. The second night, though, that's when everything changed. It started subtle. Around midnight, I was sitting by the fire alone, just staring into the flames while the others were already in their tents. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. If you've spent enough time outdoors, you know what I mean. The kind of silence that presses in, where even the wind feels like it's holding its breath. Then I heard it. A whisper. Not wind through the trees. An actual voice. Faint, distant, but there. I froze, my skin prickling. It came from beyond the firelight, out in the trees. Too far to make out words, but close enough that I knew it wasn't my imagination. At first, I thought maybe one of my friends had gotten up to take a piss and was messing with me. But then I heard another one. A second whisper, layered under the first, coming from the opposite direction. I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the creeping unease. Wind. Just the wind. Then it moved. The whispering shifted, circling us. One moment it was near the trees behind me, the next it was coming from the right, then the left. Always just outside the fire's glow. I leaned forward, straining to hear, but the words were just out of reach, like a conversation you're not meant to be a part of. Then I laughed. Low, breathless, way too close. I shot up, my heart slamming against my ribs. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it into the trees. Nothing. Just the same unmoving forest. The same tall pines, their black silhouettes swaying against the star-dotted sky. I told myself it was my imagination, sleep deprivation, paranoia, the way fire messes with your senses in the dark. So, like an idiot, I convinced myself to ignore it. I put out the fire and climbed into my tent, zipping it up tight. My heart was still racing, but I forced myself to close my eyes. That was mistake number 1. I don't know how long I laid there, but at some point I drifted off. And then, in the dead of night, something woke me up. A whisper, outside my tent. I stopped breathing. It was so quiet, so deliberate, like someone was crouched inches from the fabric, speaking directly to me. I couldn't make out the words, but it was low, raspy, like whoever or whatever was out there wasn't used to speaking. I wanted to scream, I wanted to move, but I just lay there, my muscles locked up, my mind refusing to process what was happening. Then, slowly the whispering moved, circling the tent. It was multiple voices now, soft, murmuring, like a conversation just out of earshot, just beyond understanding. And then the zipper moved. Not a lot, just a little, a soft, slow tug. I snapped out of my paralysis and lunged for my knife. Silence. The whispering stopped. My breath was the only sound in the tent, coming in short, panicked bursts. I stayed like that until the first light of dawn. When I finally unzipped the tent and stepped out, my friends were already awake, looking just as freaked out as I felt. Before I could even say anything, Mike, the most level-headed guy in our group, spoke first. "You guys heard it too, right? Turns out I wasn't alone." Each of them had woken up at some point in the night to the whispers. They'd heard the voices circling the camp, moving through the trees. But the worst part? None of us had unzipped our tents. But in the dirt around the campsite there were footprints. Not ours. They were thin, bare, too many, circling each tent. We packed up and got the hell out of there within 10 minutes, leaving most of our gear behind. None of us spoke the entire hike back. I don't know what was out there, I don't know what we heard, what we almost saw, but I know one thing for sure. We weren't alone in those woods, and whatever was out there, it never wanted us to leave. I haven't been camping since. I don't talk about this night often. Even now, years later, I still get a pit in my stomach when I think about it. At the time, I was 16, doing the usual babysitting gigs for extra cash. It was nothing serious, just watching kids for a few hours while their parents had a night out. Most of the jobs were for neighbors or family friends, but this one was different. I got the job through a woman my mom knew from work. She had a friend, Lauren, who needed a sitter at the last minute. Her usual one had canceled, and she was desperate. I had never met Lauren before, but my mom reassured me she was a single mom with a 4-year-old son, just trying to get a night off. I didn't think much of it. I should have. Lauren's house was about 10 minutes away, tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac. When I got there, it was already dark. The house itself was small but well kept, the kind of place that felt a little too clean, like no one actually lived there. Lauren answered the door, looking stressed but friendly. She had on a black dress, her hair pinned up like she had rushed to get ready. "I can't thank you enough for coming," she said, pulling me inside. "Michael's already had dinner, and he's pretty easy. Just put him to bed by 9 and you're good." I nodded, glancing around. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Michael was standing in the hallway, just staring at me. Big brown eyes, blonde hair. He clutched a stuffed Animala floppy. Gray ribbit so tightly his knuckles were pale. Lauren turned to him. "Michael, say hi to Anna." He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there. Lauren sighed, gave me an apologetic smile and grabbed her purse. "He's a little shy." She kissed the top of his head. "Be good for Anna, okay? Mommy will be back soon." Michael still didn't speak. Lauren hesitated, like she wanted to say something else. Then, under her breath so soft I almost didn't hear it, she muttered, "Stay in the living room." I frowned. "What?" She shook her head. "Nothing. Just call me if you need anything." And then she was gone. The second the door shut, Michael turned and walked away. Not to the couch. Not to his room. Just down the hallway, into the dark. I hesitated, then followed him. "Hey buddy, do you want to watch a movie?" I called after him. No answer. I found him standing in the middle of the hallway, staring at the floor. He didn't turn to look at me. Didn't move at all. I felt my stomach tighten. I took a step closer. "Michael?" Still nothing. I was about to reach for his shoulder when he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "He doesn't like when people go down the hallway." My breath hitched. I forced a laugh. "Who doesn't?" He didn't answer. Just turned and walked back to the living room like nothing happened. I stood there for a moment, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. Then I shook it off and followed him. The rest of the night was uneventful. At least at first. Michael barely spoke, but he sat next to me on the couch while I put on a movie. When 9 rolled around, I told him it was bedtime. He shook his head. "Come on, bud," I said, standing up. "It's late." He gripped his stuffed rabbit tighter. Then in the same flat, quiet voice he said, "He gets mad when kids go to bed." A chill crept down my spine. I forced another laugh. "Who gets mad?" Michael didn't answer. Instead, he whispered, "He's watching us." I stared at him. Then I don't know why I looked at the hallway. The air felt wrong. Still, like something was there. Waiting. I swallowed hard. "Michael, let's go to bed." He shook his head again. This time, he looked scared. And for the first time that night, his voice wasn't flat. It was small, weak. "Please don't make me," he whispered. I exhaled, trying to stay calm. "Michael, nothing bad is going to happen. You're safe." He didn't answer. Just squeezed his stuffed rabbit to his chest and stared at the hallway. I followed his gaze. The hallway light was off. But for a split second, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a shadow move. I grabbed my phone. I was done with this. I didn't care if Lauren thought I was overreacting. Something was wrong. I opened my messages and typed, "Hey, Michael won't go to bed. He keeps saying someone's watching us. Is there a camera in the house or something?" I sent it and waited. 3 dots appeared. Then Lauren's reply. Just 2 words. "Get out." My stomach flipped. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. Then another message popped up. "Take Michael. Get in the car. Do not go near the hallway." A slow, creeping dread filled my chest. I looked at Michael. His face was pale. His little hands were shaking as he clutched his rabbit. I could hear my own breath, too loud in the silence. Then, a soft creak echoed from the hallway, like a door opening. Only there was no door there. Just darkness. And I swear to God, I saw something move inside it. I didn't think. I grabbed Michael's hand and ran, straight to the front door, fumbling with the lock. Michael was crying, whispering something over and over, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my own pulse in my ears. Finally, the lock clicked. I yanked the door open and bolted outside, pulling Michael with me. I ran to my car, threw open the door, and shoved him into the passenger seat. Then I turned just for a second, and in the darkened doorway of the house, I saw it. A figure, tall, thin, standing in the hallway, watching us. I don't remember getting in the car. I don't remember starting the engine. I just remember speeding down the street, hands shaking on the wheel, Michael sobbing next to me. Lauren's house shrinking in the rearview mirror. And the figure, still standing in the doorway, still watching, like it knew we'd be back. I drove in silence, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Michael was still crying, small, stifled sobs into his stuffed rabbit. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that we were safe, but I wasn't sure if that was true. Lauren's text repeated in my head, over and over. "Get out. Take Michael. Get in the car. Do not go near the hallway." She had known. She had known something was there, and she had left me alone with it. I didn't stop driving until I reached the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station a few miles away. It was bright, flashing neon lights reflecting off the windshield. There were people inside, normal people, and for the first time since I left Lauren's house, I felt like I could breathe again. I turned to Michael. His face was pale, streaked with tears. He still clutched his rabbit so tightly I thought he might rip it apart. "Hey, buddy," I kept my voice soft. "It's okay. We're safe." He didn't respond. Didn't even look at me. His little body was rigid, his eyes locked on the dashboard, like he was afraid to move. I reached for my phone. No new messages from Lauren. I hesitated for a second, then called her. It rang once, twice. Then she answered. "Anna?" Her voice was shaky, breathless. I exhaled in relief. "Lauren, what the hell is going on?" A pause. Then, in a whisper, "Is he with you?" I glanced at Michael. "Yes, we're in my car." Another pause. Then Lauren let out a long, shaky breath. "Thank God." I waited, but she didn't say anything else. "What happened?" I pressed. "Why did you tell me to leave?" I expected her to make something up, to say it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But she didn't. Instead, her voice came back hoarse. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. "I thought maybe it would be okay, that it wouldn't act up tonight." I felt my stomach drop. "What wouldn't act up?" Silence. Then a sniffle. Lauren was crying. "When we first moved in, Michael had night terrors," she said. "At least, that's what I thought they were. He'd wake up screaming about something in the hallway, something watching him." I swallowed hard. He called it the tall man. The word sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to Michael, still curled up in the passenger seat, his small fingers twisting the ears of his stuffed rabbit. "Michael," I whispered, "the tall man, is that who you were talking about earlier?" Michael's breathing hitched. Slowly he turned his head and nodded. My mouth went dry. I turned back to the phone. "Lauren, I saw something in the hallway." A sharp inhale on the other end of the line. Then, in a whisper, "I know." She told me everything. How Michael's terrors got worse. How he refused to sleep in his room, always waking up in tears, saying the tall man was watching. How, at first, she had dismissed it as just a child's imagination, until she started seeing things too. It started small, she said. I'd wake up and find the hallway light on, even though I always turned it off before bed. I'd hear soft creaks in the floorboards, like footsteps. I shivered. But then, she hesitated. Then I saw him. I gripped the phone tighter. "Saw him how?" "I woke up in the middle of the night," she said. "I don't know why. Just that weird feeling you get sometimes. Like something's wrong." I knew that feeling. I had felt it just a few hours ago. "I looked at the hallway," Lauren continued, voice shaking. "And there he was, tall, thin, standing completely still." I pressed my hand to my mouth. "I only saw him for a second." She swallowed. Then the light flickered, and he was gone. I was shaking now. I had seen him too. Not clearly, not like she had. But I had felt him, standing there, watching us. "Lauren," I whispered, "why didn't you move?" She let out a bitter laugh. "I tried. I broke the lease after 6 months. I was ready to leave." She paused. "But then Michael went missing." My entire body tensed. "What?" She took a deep breath. "It was only for 2 hours. I was packing up and I turned around and he was just gone. I searched everywhere. The cops were on their way." Her voice trembled. "And then, out of nowhere, he was back." A heavy silence settled between us. I barely managed to speak. "Where was he?" Lauren sniffled. "I don't know. He didn't remember. He just kept saying the same thing over and over." My pulse hammered. "What did he say?" Lauren's voice dropped to a whisper. "He let me go." A wave of nausea rolled through me. I looked at Michael again. He was staring at me now, eyes wide, unblinking. Something inside me twisted. "I think he's attached to Michael," Lauren whispered. I felt cold all over. "The tall man?" "Yes, and I don't know if he's waiting, if he's watching. But every time I tried to leave that house, something brought us back." Her voice cracked. "That's why I still live there." I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, staring at Michael, my skin crawling with an invisible weight. "Anna," Lauren said finally, "you need to bring him home." I didn't answer. I was too focused on Michael. His face had changed. He wasn't crying anymore. He looked blank, empty. Then finally spoke. But it wasn't his voice. "He's waiting." I dropped the phone. My hands trembled against the wheel. Michael smiled. Just slightly. I had never seen him smile before. And something told me that wasn't Michael anymore. I stared at Michael, my body frozen, my breath caught in my throat. He had just spoken. But it wasn't his voice. It was something deeper. Something wrong. "He's waiting." That's what he said. And then he smiled. Just slightly. Just enough for me to know that wasn't Michael anymore. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Every instinct in me screamed to get out of the car, to run, to leave him there. But I couldn't. Because whatever was happening, whatever this thing was, Michael was still in there somewhere. I had to get him back. I reached for my phone with a shaking hand and put it on speaker. "Lauren," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael just said something. Silence on the other end. Then carefully, what did he say? I swallowed. He said, "He's waiting." A sharp inhale. Lauren's voice came back, strained. "Anna, listen to me carefully." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "You need to bring him home. Now." My stomach twisted. "Lauren, now." I turned the key in the ignition. Michael was watching me. His hand still clutched his stuffed rabbit, but his grip was too tight, like he was holding on to something much heavier than fabric. I started driving. He didn't blink, didn't ask where we were going, just sat there, still and silent. It felt wrong, like I wasn't alone in the car, like something else was sitting between us, breathing in the space we couldn't see. The closer we got to the house, the heavier the air became, like a storm building inside my chest. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Lauren was already outside, waiting on the porch. She didn't run toward us, didn't wave. She just stood there, still, like she was afraid to move. I reached for Michael's hand. It was ice cold. "Come on, bud," I whispered. "Let's go inside." For the first time in a long time, he moved. He turned his head toward me, blinking like he was coming out of a fog. Then, in the smallest voice, "I don't want to." I swallowed hard. "Why not?" Michael's lip quivered. "He'll be mad." I felt sick. I took his hand and led him out of the car, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Lauren didn't move from the porch. She just whispered, "Hurry." Michael hesitated at the front steps. For a second I thought he might fight me. But then, all at once, his body went limp, like a puppet with its strings cut. I caught him before he hit the ground, my pulse slamming against my ribs. His small fingers gripped my wrist, tightly. His breath rasped against my arm as he whispered, "Don't let him take me again." I didn't think. I carried him inside. Lauren slammed the door shut behind us, flipping the lock so fast her hands shook. The house was pitch black. The air felt thick, suffocating. Michael was trembling in my arms. Lauren grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the hallway. "We need to put him to bed." I stopped short. "What?" She didn't look at me. "That's the only way." I stared at her. "Lauren, I don't think he needs sleep. I think he needs a priest." She finally turned to face me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. She looked broken. "I know this sounds crazy," she whispered, "but it's the only way to get him back. He has to sleep in his own bed. That's where he was when he disappeared before." I shook my head. "What if that's how he disappeared in the first place?" Lauren's voice cracked. "Then we won't let him go." I carried Michael down the hallway, Lauren's footsteps slow behind me. The closer we got to his room, the more he tensed. I could feel it in his tiny body, the fear. Like he knew what was coming. Like he had done this before. We reached his room. I hesitated at the threshold. The air felt different here. Heavy, stagnant, like something was waiting. Lauren pulled back the blankets. I placed Michael down gently. His eyes were glassy. Lauren whispered, "Close your eyes, sweetheart." Michael whimpered. Then, in a broken whisper, "Please don't let him take me." I squeezed his hand. "We won't." His eyelids fluttered, and then he was asleep. The house went silent, thick, unmoving. Lauren and I stood over his bed, staring at him, waiting. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us breathed. And then, the hallway light flickered. A sharp, static sound hissed through the air. And behind us, a creak. Slow, deliberate, like a footstep on old wood. Lauren's grip tightened on my arm. We weren't alone. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just kept my eyes on Michael. His little chest rose and fell, slow and steady. Lauren whispered something. A prayer, maybe. A plea. The air shifted. A low, creaking sound moved past us, toward the bed. Michael shuddered in his sleep. Lauren squeezed her eyes shut. And then, the closet door creaked open. A rush of air blew through the room. Michael jerked. Lauren grabbed my hand. "Hold him," she whispered. "Hold him tight." I did. His body went rigid. Then, for a single unbearable moment, everything went still. And then, the house exhaled, a low, quiet breath, and Michael relaxed. The air lightened. The hallway was empty again. Lauren let out a shuddering sob. I looked down. Michael's face was peaceful, like he had finally been let go. Lauren moved a few months later. She never told me where. I never asked. I don't know if the tall man followed her, or if he's still in that house waiting for the next child. But sometimes, I still wake up in the middle of the night, and for a split second, I swear I can see a shadow standing in the hallway, watching, waiting, for someone new. I don't know if I'm just being paranoid or if something is really wrong, but I need someone to tell me if I'm overreacting before I confront her. I guess I should start with some context. I've been dating Emily for about a year. We moved in together 3 months ago, and until recently things have been great. She's funny, thoughtful, and honestly, she makes me feel like I finally found someone who gets me. There's just one problem. My pets keep dying. I know how that sounds, but I swear to God it wasn't like this before she moved in. I've always loved animals, small kind especially. I have a tank of freshwater shrimp, 2 hamsters, and a gecko. I know they're not the most exciting pets, but they mean a lot to me. I've had most of them for years without issues. Then, right after Emily moved in, things started happening. First, my gecko, Benny, stopped eating. He was perfectly healthy before super active, always darting around his enclosure. But suddenly, he just sat in one spot all the time. He wouldn't touch his food, barely reacted when I picked him up. 2 weeks later, he was dead. I was devastated, but I chalked it up to bad luck. These things happen, right? Then one of my hamsters, Milo, died. Same thing, fine one day, sick the next, gone within a week. I had him for almost 3 years with no issues, and then out of nowhere, he just wasted away. I started to feel uneasy after that. 2 pets dying back to back, that wasn't normal. I deep cleaned all my enclosures, checked for mold, checked the temperatures, changed the filters, everything. Then the shrimp started dying. Not all at once, but one by one. Every morning I'd find a few floating at the top of the tank, their legs curled up unnaturally. That's when I started to feel sick. Something wasn't right. I tried to talk to Emily about it. I told her how weird it was, how it felt like all my pets were dying too close together for it to be a coincidence. She looked genuinely sad. She hugged me, told me she was sorry, that she knew how much they meant to me. She even helped me bury Milo in the backyard. For a little while I felt stupid. Of course she wasn't doing anything. She loved animals. She told me once she used to volunteer at a shelter. But then last night happened. And now, I can't ignore the feeling in my gut. I woke up at 2 a.m. to get a drink. As I passed by the living room, I saw Emily sitting on the couch in the dark. I almost called out to her, but then I saw what she was holding. My other hamster, Luna. She was cupped in Emily's hands, completely still. For a second, I thought she was petting her. But then Emily did something that made my stomach twist. She lifted her hand just slightly and let Luna drop. Not far, but enough. Enough to make Luna's tiny body jerk on impact. I must have made a noise because Emily's head snapped up. She saw me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she smiled just barely. "I think she likes it," she whispered. I just stood there. She lifted Luna again and dropped her. Again. I must have stepped forward without realizing it because Emily suddenly looked surprised, like she had just remembered I was there. She gently placed Luna back in her enclosure. Then she stood up, walked past me, and went back to bed. Like nothing had happened. I barely slept after that. I just sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was I imagining things? Had I seen it wrong? But no. I didn't imagine the way she let Luna fall. I didn't imagine that smile. And now I can't stop thinking about it. What if she wasn't playing? What if she's been hurting them all along? What if Benny, Milo, the shrimp, all of them weren't just accidents? I need to know what you guys think. Because if I'm right, I don't know what to do next. I barely slept after what I saw. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying it. The way Emily lifted Luna, the way she let her drop, the way she smiled. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation, that maybe I was just reading into it too much. Maybe she really thought Luna liked it. But deep down, I knew that was bullshit. It wasn't just that moment, it was all of it. Benny getting sick out of nowhere. Milo dying when nothing was wrong. The shrimp floating in my tank one by one. The way Emily acted so normal about it all. Like she wasn't even surprised. Like she already knew what had happened. I spent the next day watching her. Not obviously. I acted normal. I made coffee. I scrolled through my phone. But I kept my eyes on her, looking for something that would confirm my suspicions. She acted exactly the same as always. Sweet, attentive. She kissed me on the cheek before she left for work. She sent me a text in the afternoon. Hope you're feeling better today. Love you, Erwan. And for a second, just a second, I felt insane. Like I was losing it. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I had just walked in at the wrong moment last night, and she really was just playing. Maybe all my pets really did just die from bad luck. But then that night, I caught her again. I woke up around 1:30 a.m. I don't even know why. Maybe my subconscious was still on edge, waiting for something to happen. The apartment was silent. But then, just like last time, I saw a faint light from the living room. I slid out of bed carefully so I wouldn't wake her. But when I looked at the blankets, she wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I stepped into the hallway, moving as quietly as I could. And when I turned the corner, I saw her. Sitting on the floor, right in front of Luna's enclosure, holding her again. But this time, she wasn't just dropping her. She was squeezing. Not hard, not enough to kill her, but enough to make her squirm. Enough to make her little body stiffen in discomfort. Emily's face was completely calm, like she was testing something, seeing how far she could go. I don't remember stepping forward, but suddenly I was right there, my voice sharp in the silence. Put her back. Emily's head snapped toward me. For a second, she didn't say anything. Then she sighed and gently placed Luna back inside the enclosure. I expected her to be embarrassed, maybe even guilty, but she just looked at me and said, "You're overreacting." My blood went cold. "What the hell is wrong with you?" My voice was low, shaking. "That's not how you handle animals." She rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, I wasn't hurting her. You're acting like I was torturing her or something." I felt something dark rise in my chest. "Benny wasn't sick, was he?" I whispered. She froze. For a fraction of a second, something flashed across her face, something I had never seen before. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. She sighed again, rubbing her temple. "Jesus, you're being weird. You need to let this go." I just stood there, staring at her. Let it go? Was she serious? She turned and walked past me, back toward the bedroom like nothing had happened. And in that moment, I felt something shift. A part of me that had been making excuses for her for every little thing that felt off, for every pet that had died snapped. I didn't imagine this. I wasn't overreacting. Something was wrong with Emily. And now, I had proof. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room for hours just thinking, trying to piece everything together. How long had she been like this? Had she always been this way and just hid it well? Or was there something deeper? Was this a warning sign? If she could hurt something small, something fragile, something that couldn't fight back, would she stop there? Would it escalate? I don't know. I really don't. This morning she acted like nothing happened. She made coffee. She kissed me before leaving for work. Like last night never happened. like she hadn't looked me in the eye and told me to let it go. I haven't said anything to her. Not yet. But I've been sitting here all morning wondering what I'm supposed to do. Do I confront her? Do I break up with her? Is this a deal breaker? Or am I just jumping to the worst conclusion? I mean, she didn't kill Luna. Not yet. But how long before she does? And how long before it's not just my pets? I guess what I'm asking is, what do you think? Am I crazy? Or should I be worried? Because honestly, I don't know anymore. I moved into this apartment 6 months ago, and for the most part it's been quiet. It's a small building, only 6 units in total, and most of the tenants keep to themselves. No crowded hallways, no unnecessary interactions. The layout is simple. 3 floors, 2 units per level. I live on the 2nd floor, apartment 2B, and the unit next to mine 2 has been vacant since I moved in. I know because I asked the landlord when I signed the lease. He mentioned it offhand, saying the last tenant moved out suddenly and he hadn't gotten around to renting it again. I didn't think much of it at the time. Then I started hearing the screams. It started a few weeks ago. At first I thought I had imagined it. I was up late working on my laptop with my headphones in when I heard something faint. I pulled out my earbuds and listened. A voice. Muffled, but unmistakable. A woman. Crying. I sat there for a moment, waiting to hear more. It was so distant, so quiet, that I thought maybe it was just someone on the street. But then it happened again, closer this time. It was coming from 2A, the vacant apartment. I stood up, pressing my ear to the wall that separated my unit from the one next door. The sobbing was clearer now, soft, broken, raw. And then, all at once, it stopped. I waited, held my breath, listened for movement. Nothing. I told myself I was imagining things, that old buildings make weird noises, that maybe I had been hearing something from another floor, another unit, another explanation that didn't involve someone crying in an empty apartment. That worked for one night. Then it happened again. This time, I was ready. I checked the clock, 2:03 a.m. The same sound-muffled sobs, like someone desperately trying to keep quiet but failing. I moved closer to the wall, listened. The crying grew louder, then suddenly cut off with a sharp gasp. And then, footsteps. Not mine. Not above me. Inside 2A, I backed away from the wall, my pulse hammering. There shouldn't be anyone in there. The landlord said it was empty. No one had moved in. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the building's emergency maintenance number. I hesitated. What was I supposed to say? I think I heard something in the empty apartment next door. I knew how that would go. They'd send someone over the next day, take a quick look around, and tell me I was hearing things. I locked my door instead. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I caught my landlord in the hallway. He's an older guy, always wearing the same faded flannel and a pair of jeans that look like they've been through 100 washes too many. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Someone moved into 2A?" He frowned. Number, still empty. I hesitated. "You sure?" His frown deepened. "Why?" I shrugged. "I thought I heard something last night. Sounded like someone was in there." He let out a dry chuckle. "Unless they're paying rent under the table, there shouldn't be." I tried to gauge his reaction. He didn't seem worried, didn't even seem particularly interested. "You got thin walls," he said, already turning toward the stairwell. "Sound carries." That was the end of the conversation. Thin walls. That was the answer I was supposed to accept. But thin walls don't explain what happened the next night. I was already on edge, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. 2 a.m. Silence. 2:02 a.m. Still nothing. 2:05 a.m. Then, a knock. Not on my door. On the wall between my apartment and 2A. Slow, deliberate. 3 knocks. I sat up so fast I nearly lost my balance. I didn't move, didn't breathe. 3 more knocks. Closer. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady beneath me. I moved toward the wall, pressing my palm against the cold surface. The apartment was supposed to be empty. I knocked back. Once, a pause. Then, the sound of something scraping against the floor. Not a shuffle, not footsteps. Something being dragged. I stumbled back, my mind racing through every possible explanation. An animal? A squatter? A mistake? I grabbed my phone and called my landlord. It went to voicemail. I swallowed hard, staring at the wall, my thoughts a tangled mess. I needed to see inside that apartment, and I wasn't going to wait for permission. The next morning, when the landlord wasn't around, I checked the maintenance closet in the basement. It was unlocked. I found the master key. I held it in my palm, my fingers pressing into the cold metal. If I was wrong, I'd look like an idiot. Maybe I'd even get in trouble. But if I was right, I had to know. That night, I waited until 1:45 a.m. I stood outside 2A, key in hand. At 2 a.m., I heard it again. A muffled sob. I slid the key into the lock, pulse pounding. Turned it. The door clicked open. I stepped inside. The air smelled stale, untouched, the kind of scent places get when they've been closed off for too long. I took a slow step forward. The floor creaked beneath my weight. The apartment was dark, but I could just make out the outlines of covered furniture, empty counters, a bare mattress on the floor. And then, a whisper, right behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I spun, but there was nothing. Just an empty doorway leading into the bathroom. I backed up, my skin crawling, every instinct screaming at me to leave. I reached for the door handle. That's when I noticed it. The closet. The door was slightly open, and inside, through the narrow gap, a pair of wide, unblinking eyes staring back at me. I couldn't move. The eyes in the closet were locked onto mine, wide and unblinking. For a moment, everything around me disappeared. The air felt thick, suffocating, like the walls were closing in, like the entire apartment was holding its breath. Then the door creaked open another inch. I didn't think, I just reacted. I grabbed the door handle, yanked it open, and swung my flashlight inside. The closet was empty. The light flickered over bare walls, an old wooden shelf, and dust floating in the stale air. No one was there. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I had seen something. I knew I had. I scanned the space again, taking slow, careful steps forward. The closet was deeper than I expected, narrow but long, stretching further back than it should have. The walls had patchy, uneven paint, as if something had been covered up. And then my flashlight landed on something that made my stomach drop. Fingernail scratches. Dozens of them, lining the back wall. Some were old, faded, like they had been there for years. Others were sharper, fresher, deeper. My breath came too fast now, my fingers tingling with adrenaline. Someone had been in here. Not recently, but at some point, someone had clawed at this wall. I reached out, hesitating, then pressed my palm against the back panel. It felt hollow, the tiniest gap between the wood and the drywall. I curled my fingers under the edge and pulled. The entire panel shifted. Behind it, a dark, gaping hole. A hidden passage. And that's when I heard it. A sharp inhale. Not mine. From inside the wall. I staggered backward, barely managing to catch myself before I fell. My flashlight wobbled in my grip, the beam slicing through the darkness like a blade. The breath had been soft, faint, but it was real. Someone was in there. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the closet door, yanked it shut, and bolted. Out of 2A, out of the hallway, into my own apartment, where I locked both the deadbolt and the chain, my hands shaking as I slid to the floor. What the hell had I just found? I didn't sleep. The next morning I debated calling the cops, but what was I supposed to say? I think there's a hidden passage in an empty apartment, and I heard breathing inside it. That was the fastest way to get them to shrug it off, or worse, think I'd lost it. number. I needed proof. I spent the entire day pretending things were normal. Went to work, ran errands, answered texts like I wasn't unraveling. Then, at midnight, I grabbed a small camera I used for work, set it to night vision, and slipped out of my apartment. I knew if I waited too long, I'd lose my nerve. I unlocked 2A again and slipped inside. It was colder tonight, or maybe it just felt that way. The closet door was still shut. I stood there for a moment, gripping the camera so tightly my knuckles ached. Then, I moved forward and opened the door. The closet looked exactly the same: scratches along the walls, the hollow panel, the passage behind it gaping like an open wound. I turned on the camera. Then, without giving myself time to hesitate, I reached inside. The air was cooler in there, stagnant. I pushed the camera in further, angling it toward the unseen space beyond. I hit record. Then I pulled my arm back and shut the closet door. I left immediately. Back in my own apartment, I locked the door behind me and sat on the floor staring at the camera in my hands. I didn't want to watch the footage, but I had to. I took a deep breath, clicked play, and let the recording run. The screen flickered to life. The grainy night vision captured everything in eerie green and black. The closet, the panel, the hidden passage. The footage moved as I pushed the camera inside, catching glimpses of what lay beyond. A narrow tunnel, too small to be a real passageway, too big to be a structural gap. And then, something moved. I sat up, pulse slamming against my ribs. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But then I saw it. A hand, thin, pale. It reached out toward the camera. Then, a face, peeking from the darkness. A woman. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, staring directly at the lens. I could see every detail: the sharp bones of her face, the dark hollows under her eyes, her lips parted like she was about to speak. And then, she lurched forward. The footage cut to static. I dropped the camera, my entire body rigid with fear. I had seen her. She had seen me. And she was still in there, watching, waiting. And now, she knew I had found her. I sat there for a long time, staring at the camera like it might start playing on its own again, like maybe I had imagined what I had seen. I hadn't. There had been a woman inside the wall. She had reached for the camera. She had seen me. And now, she knew that I had seen her too. My body was tense, rigid, every muscle coiled like a spring, but my mind was racing, trying to process what this meant. Had she been there the whole time? Had she been living inside that hidden passage, moving between the walls? Had she been the one crying at night, knocking on my wall, listening to me when I thought I was alone? The thought made my stomach twist. I needed to get out of here. But then what? I couldn't just leave. If I walked away now, I'd never sleep again. I'd always wonder if she was still there, if she had moved into another wall, if she had already found someone else to watch. I needed to end this. I grabbed my phone and dialed the landlord. It went to voicemail, again. I left a message, my voice sharp and controlled. I know someone's been living in 2A. There's a hidden space in the wall, and I have it on camera. Either you deal with it, or I call the police. I ended the call before he could ignore it. Then, I grabbed the camera and forced myself to watch the footage again. The woman's face, pale and hollow, stared back at me. I paused the video, heart pounding, and looked closer. Her eyes were too wide, like she had been in the dark too long. Her skin looked gray, stretched, like she had been sick or starving. She had been hiding. But from who? I didn't sleep. Every sound, every creak of the old building made my skin prickle. I was hyper-aware of the wall next to me, of the empty apartment beyond it that wasn't really empty. I stayed up, sitting in the living room with a knife clutched in my hand. It was stupid, but it made me feel like I had some kind of control. At 3:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text. From the landlord, I'll handle it. Don't go into 2A again. Something about those words made my skin crawl. I stared at the message, rereading it, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest. I should have been relieved. I should have felt safer. I didn't, because something about this wasn't right. The next day I stayed home waiting. The landlord showed up around noon. He didn't knock on my door. He went straight to 2A. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening. There was movement, the sound of something heavy scraping across the floor. Then muffled voices. Not just him. Someone else was in there. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent. Angry. Then a sound that made my stomach drop. A whimper. It was her. I didn't think I just moved. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I unlocked my door and stepped into the hallway. The door to 2A was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The landlord spun around, eyes wild. And in front of him, the woman, filthy, thin, wrists bound with duct tape. Her mouth was covered, but her eyes, those same wide, terrified eyes from my camera, locked onto mine. She was real, not a ghost, not my imagination. A person, trapped inside this rotting apartment, inside the walls, for God knows how long. The landlord's face twisted into something ugly. I told you to stay out of this. I didn't respond. I raised my phone, made sure he saw it recording. His expression shifted. A second of hesitation, a flicker of fear. Then he ran, shoved past me and bolted down the hallway. I didn't chase him. I turned to the woman and hurried toward her, ripping the tape from her mouth. Her voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. Please, don't let him take me again. I grabbed my phone with one hand, dialing 911 as I used the other to cut the bindings from her wrists. The dispatcher picked up. My name is Redacted. I live at Redacted. There's a woman being held hostage in my building. The suspect just fled. The woman sagged against me, her breathing ragged, and I held her up, waiting for sirens, waiting for this nightmare to end. The police arrived fast. They searched the building top to bottom, but the landlord was gone. He had vanished, like he had known this moment was coming. The woman, her name was Hannah, was taken to the hospital. She had been missing for almost 2 years. The last thing she remembered before waking up in the walls was being in her car. Someone had pulled her over, flashing what looked like a badge. Then darkness. She had been kept somewhere else first, but eventually she was moved here, locked inside that hidden passage, in the space between walls. She had knocked. She had screamed, and no one had heard her. Until me. The investigation is still ongoing. The police found other hidden spaces in the building. No bodies. But other signs. Hair, scraps of fabric, old restraints. I moved out the next day. I didn't care about my security deposit. I didn't care about the lease. I just packed and left. Because even though she was gone, even though the apartment was empty again, I still felt like someone was watching, like there were still eyes inside those walls, and I wasn't waiting to find out if they were real. I don't really know how to start this. I've told a few close friends, but every time I do, I feel like I sound crazy. But I swear this happened. For a while, I worked as a park ranger at a remote national park. I won't say which one because, well, if you've ever heard of the missing 411 cases, you'll understand why. Most of the job was boring, checking trails, making sure campers weren't doing anything stupid, responding to the occasional lost hiker. Pretty standard stuff. But the nights were different. The park had designated campgrounds, but there were always those hardcore hikers who wanted to venture deep into the backcountry. Those were the ones we worried about, because sometimes they didn't come back, and sometimes they called for help. This happened in late September, right before the park started shutting down for the season. I was covering the overnight shift, monitoring the radio while my partner Dave was out on patrol. It was a quiet night, until the walkie crackled. Not the main radio, but my walkie-talkie? Now, that might not seem weird, but the only people who had access to our channel were park staff. And this voice? It wasn't anyone I knew. I grabbed the walkie, holding it to my ear. The transmission was full of static, but beneath it I could hear it. A man's voice. Low, panicked. Help me. I sat up fast, my stomach twisting. Hello? This is Park Ranger Lewis. Can you repeat that? The signal was weak, garbled, like the voice was coming from far away. Then, clearer this time. Help me, please. I'm lost. I don't know where I am. I grabbed the radio, flipping to the main frequency. HQ, this is Lewis. I just got an SOS on my walkie. Do we have any hikers reported missing? There was a pause, then static. Finally, the supervisor's voice came through. Negative. No missing persons reports. I hesitated. If no one had been reported missing, who the hell was on our private channel? I switched back to the walkie. Sir, can you tell me your name, your location? Nothing. Just static. Then, deep breathing. Slow, labored. Like whoever was on the other end was hurt. It's dark. I don't know where I am. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I grabbed my flashlight, already heading for the ATV parked outside the ranger station. Okay, stay calm. Do you have any landmarks nearby? Anything you can see? For a long moment, silence. Then, why do I say you? I stopped cold. The walkie hissed with static, the signal warping, stretching, distorting. My heart hammered. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight cutting through the trees. Nothing. Just the empty ranger station, the dark woods, the distant mountains. I swallowed hard, gripping the walkie tight. What do you mean, you see me? The static spiked. Then, laughter. Low. Breathless. Not a man's voice anymore. I dropped the walkie. It hit the dirt with a dull thud, the speaker still crackling, hissing like a thing alive. I backed up toward the ATV, every instinct screaming at me to get the hell out of there. Then, just before I reached it, the walkie went silent. Not static, not breathing, just dead air. Like whatever had been speaking had left. Or worse, it was never there to begin with. I didn't sleep that night. Hell, I barely breathed. I sat in the ranger station with the doors locked, the radio clutched in my hand, waiting for the voice to come back. It never did. The next morning I told my supervisor. He just gave me a look. The kind that said, drop it. I did. For the rest of my time as a ranger, I never worked the night shift alone again. But the worst part? A week later, a hiker was reported missing. When they found his body, it was deep in the woods, miles from any trail. His radio was still clutched in his frozen hands. The rangers never released the recording, but I know what they heard, because that night, when I was all alone in the dark, I heard it too. A week after the night I heard the voice on my walkie, the missing hiker's body was found. It was a search and rescue team that discovered him, about 12 miles from the nearest trail, way off any marked paths. He was face down in a dry creek bed, body twisted like he had fallen from somewhere high. His radio was still gripped in his stiff fingers, pressed tight against his mouth like he'd died calling for help. But here's the thing. His radio? It was on our private ranger frequency. The same one that no civilian should have access to. The same one I had heard that voice on the week before. The coroner ruled it exposure and a fall injury. Said he must have gotten lost, wandered too far, slipped and broken his leg before succumbing to the cold. A tragic accident. Case closed. Except it didn't make sense. The way his body was found. There were no tracks leading to or from him. Not his, not animals, not anyone's. Like he had just appeared there. I asked to hear the final transmission on his radio, but the higher-ups wouldn't release it. Classified evidence, they said, even to park staff. But one of the search team guys, someone I trusted, pulled me aside a few days later. His face was pale, hands shaking when he lit his cigarette. He looked me dead in the eye and said that radio was broadcasting. I swallowed. Broadcasting what? He hesitated, looking over his shoulder, then leaned in. "Dead air." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He exhaled shakily. "I mean, it was transmitting the whole time. When we found him, when we checked his radio. But there was nothing on the other end, no voice, no static, just this hollow, empty sound, like something was still listening." A chill ran down my spine. "And Lewis," he continued. His voice dropped even lower. "The battery was dead. I quit the job a month later. I don't go hiking anymore. And I don't ever keep a walkie-talkie in my house. Because sometimes when I'm lying in bed late at night, I swear I can still hear it. The low hum, crackling static. And just beneath it, breathing." A few years back, I was in a tight spot financially. Bills were piling up, and my part-time gig at the local diner wasn't cutting it. One evening, while scrolling through job listings, I stumbled upon an ad. "Earn $1,000 a week for part-time cleaning. Flexible hours." It sounded like a godsend. I was skeptical, but desperate. The contact was a local number, so I decided to call. A man named Mr. Thompson answered. He explained that they needed someone to clean out apartments after tenants had abruptly left. He assured me the job was straightforward: clean the place, dispose of any left-behind items, and ensure it was ready for the next occupant. The pay was indeed $1,000 per week for about 20 hours of work. It seemed too good to be true, but I convinced myself that maybe I'd just gotten lucky. My first assignment was an apartment in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. The building was old, but well-maintained. Mr. Thompson met me outside, handed me the keys, and told me to call him once I was done. He didn't come in with me, which I found odd, but I brushed it off. Inside, the apartment was eerily pristine. It looked like someone had just stepped out for a moment. Dishes were in the sink, a half-empty coffee cup on the table, and even a newspaper dated 2 days prior lay on the couch. It was as if the tenant had vanished into thin air. As I started cleaning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Several times I thought I heard faint whispers, but whenever I paused to listen, there was only silence. In the bedroom, I found a journal on the nightstand. Curiosity got the better of me, and I skimmed through it. The entries were mundane at first, notes about work, grocery lists, reminders. But the last entry caught my attention. March 15th. I keep seeing shadows in the corners of my eyes. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but now I'm certain something is here with me. I hear whispers at night, calling my name. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. A chill ran down my spine. I closed the journal and decided to finish up quickly. As I was about to leave, I noticed a small door in the hallway that I hadn't opened. It was a closet, mostly empty except for a few old coats. But behind the coats, I found a trapdoor leading to a crawl spaces. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The space was dark, but I could make out something glinting in the far corner. Using my phone's flashlight, I crawled in and reached for the object. It was a small, ornate box. Inside the box were several Polaroid photos. Each photo was of a different person, standing in the very apartment I was in. They all looked distressed, and in each photo, there was a shadowy figure standing just behind them, barely visible. I felt a cold draft and heard a whisper right next to my ear. I bolted out of the crawl space, grabbed my things, and left the apartment, locking the door behind me. I called Mr. Thompson and told him I couldn't continue with the job. He didn't seem surprised. "I understand," he said. "You're not the first to leave abruptly." I never went back, and I never collected the payment. To this day, I wonder about the people in those photos and what might have happened to them. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think I hear whispers calling my name.